Okay, so everyone may get a little something letting you know that this session is being recorded. So again, I'm Trish Gretz here with Bentley Memorial Library, and I want to thank you all for coming, and especially Ray Hardy for coming and doing another talk about the wildlife in our area. To let you know, we do have quite a few books here on bears, deer, and so if you are interested in finding out more information, you can always pop into the library. We'd be happy to help you find something. And so as Ray mentioned earlier, if you weren't already on, if you'd like to post any questions in the chat, we'll get back to you. I can read them off and Ray will stop periodically. And there'll also be time at the end for questions. So thank you again for coming, and Ray, take it away.
All righty. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time out to listen to me yammer away about black bears in Connecticut. Obviously, we have them, and they are becoming more abundant as we're going along here in time. We'll talk about some of the reasons why that is, and we'll talk about some of the population estimates. This PowerPoint is put together by the DEP. These are all their photographs. I didn't have enough photographs to really put together my own PowerPoint on black bears. Deer, of course, but some of the other species I don't have enough yet. So hopefully I'll be able to get my own PowerPoint at one point in time. So here's a little bit about our Connecticut black bears. As it says here, the female bears usually about 110 to 250 pounds. Male bears can be up to twice that, almost twice that. Male bears can be 150 to 450 pounds. So that normally female bears are usually called sows, and male bears are generally called boars. What we have down here, the yearlings, first year bears, 45 to 100 pounds. They can be relatively small. They have a lot of fur, so they look a lot bigger than what they actually weigh. That's the same with most wildlife. People see a coyote in their backyard and say, "Oh my God, that's a 75, 100 pound coyote." Well, probably 50 pounds at the most, but in the winter he's going to have a lot of fur. Same thing with a lot of bears and other animals too. And when we get snow coming around, might be able to see, hopefully get a chance to see the black bear tracks. They are fairly large. They walk in a manner known as a plantigrade foot plant, which is the same as us. Their heel is going to show in the track, at least on the hind foot, not on their front foot. They're just going to see the if you can see me at that palm pad, I think they call that the metatarsal pad up here. But so the black bear's front foot, you're just going to see that front portion with the toes. Their hind foot is going to show the heel, as you see here. This is the hind foot, and they have 5 toes just like us. You see 1, 2, 3, 4. Little one right here. Now that little one, that's actually comparable to that's analogous to our big toe. So their foot looks kind of in reverse when they're walking. If you see their tracks, that little toe is going to be where our big toe would be. So that's going to be on the inside of the track. So this is a right foot upside down. Or the big toe on the hind foot, or the thumb on our front, on our hands. They're fairly large, probably, oh gosh, typical might be from front to rear 7 to 8 inches maybe on the hind foot, shorter than that on the front. Here's what you would see in the mud. They have generally going to see the claws. This is the rear foot, and generally going to see the claws in the mud and the snow as well. They have fairly good sized claws. We don't have any grizzly bears around here, but grizzly bears have much longer claws, and so the imprint from the claws will be much farther out. Grizzly bears are, their claws, their feet are designed for digging, whereas black bears' claws are designed for climbing. Here's the front foot. Here's what I'm talking about here. Here you can see the heel on the rear foot back here. And on the front foot, it's just the just that front palm pad, not the heel pad. So they have, like, they're designed. They have very sharp claws, and I can speak from experience. The cubs have extremely sharp claws when they're babies. They're just like cat claws. And those serve an important purpose because they're primarily climbers. Black bears are amazing climbers. They can scoot up a tree, regardless if they're a 250-pound female or a 450-pound male. They can scoot up a tree awfully quickly, and the purchase is made on the bark with their very sharp claws. Again, cubs can climb probably more efficiently because of the sharpness of their little pinpoint claws that they have. This is a cub here climbing up a tree, and generally cubs will, if danger presents itself or some potential danger shows up, off they go. They'll be climbing up a tree, and often mother will scoot them up a tree to make sure they're in a safe place, while mother might follow them up a tree if it seems like a risky situation for them. So anyway, get into a little bit about some of the history of the bear population in Connecticut. As you can see from this graph, there's been quite a change in the forest cover in Connecticut. 1650. Interestingly, this coincides with when the colonists arrived. So I don't know if there's any connection between the loss of trees and the arrival of colonists. But yes, very definitely there is. You can see from 1650, 1700, 1750, a steady decrease in forest cover. I'm trying to think of. There was not in Connecticut, but Massachusetts colony. They started restricting people from cutting trees, and also they would try to restrict people from killing deer in about 1630. It didn't take the colonists very long to start, pretty much eradicating trees and other wildlife. Bears were some of the first to go as well. So by 1850, coming back to our forests, we're down to maybe 20% of Connecticut is forested. And we've had a steady increase. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the old farms were abandoned, and things started growing back. Didn't have the open farm. I have a photograph of where I live, taken roughly from the road in front of my place, roughly around 1860, 1865, and there were about 2 or 3 trees. You could see all the way up from Brandy Street, where I am, all the way up to the Congregational Church. You can see all the way up to the center of town, and with no trees obstructing your view. But here we are now, where we go to 2000. You see it from 1950. That was kind of the peak of the forest regenerating and coming back. 2000, we see a decrease. That has to do with development. That will probably continue. We'll probably see more loss of forest. But right now, if we're comparing things to 150 some odd years ago, in say around the Civil War, if we had 66% of Connecticut was clear, at this point in time, 66% of Connecticut is forested. So we live in the forest, and the forest is for many species we don't have a completely mature forest as yet. A lot of the trees are, many of them are 75, 100-year-old trees that are growing back. A lot of the much older trees, you don't see a whole lot of those around. You know, when you start getting over 100 and 150-year-old trees, you don't see too many of those. So they're relatively young trees, and people do harvest those for development, and also for the commercial value of they sell logging rights. We have people, there's such a demand for hardwoods. We have bidders, logging companies coming down from Canada to log some of the trees in Connecticut. So we've got quite a bit. We don't have quite as much forest as you can see here. You know, say we've got 60 some odd percent forested now. I question this 100% forested because some of the earlier colonial primary accounts, some of the first settlers that came in talked about how open a lot of the areas were in New England, southern New England, and that was primarily from Native Americans managing the habitat for their use. For cornfields, controlled burns. Well, I use that term loosely. They did do regular burning to burn off some of the ground litter and some of the understory in the forest to open things up, and also improved soil quality for certain crops. Blueberries, I think they still do that up in Maine. I think they still burn off mountaintops to improve the soil for blueberry crops, and plus less brush, less underbrush, less understory makes it a lot easier to hunt as well. So there's a question as far as the actual number of trees pre-contact. So these are the sightings. You can see this is from 2001. This only goes up to 2020. We don't have all the numbers in yet as far as the number of sightings of black bears in Connecticut, but you see a steady increase from 2001 here that's shown all the way up to 2020. Now these numbers are not individual bears. These are numbered sightings, which means that one bear may have been sighted 3 or 4 times. So it's the 3 or 4 times is the number of sightings is what's recorded here, not the actual number of bears. We do not have 11,000 bears in Connecticut. We have, just for a comparison, we have approximately 100, I think it's 110,000 deer in Connecticut. And we see those all over the place. So if we had 11,000 bears in Connecticut, they'd be all over the place. And it wouldn't be, I don't know if it'd be that exciting to see them, or whether we'd be rather nervous to see that many. But anyway, so that's a steady increase. 1980 was roughly when they really started noticing more bears coming in to Connecticut. That was the first time we had evidence of a resident bear population. That's a resident bear population means that as the name indicates, that they're residing in Connecticut, as opposed to animals that might pass through. They have a wide range. They can wander. There's been bears that have been recorded sighted in Connecticut with collars, and then they end up somewhere in New York, 500 miles away. So male bears especially can wander long distances. So bears that wander through, that are dispersing, that's one thing. But having resident bears, that means they pretty much established themselves in the state. In the 1980s is when that really actually began. That was mostly up in the northwest corner of the state, up in the foothills of the, well, I guess that's the foothills of the Berkshires up there. And that's prime habitat. That's ideal habitat for them. Now, this next graph reported conflicts through the years. Now, the word conflict has certain connotations.
Want me to get the earphones?
Perhaps maybe it might be modified by saying they're unpleasant, or
I'll call you when he's saying
even
goodbye.
sometimes it's even just a persistent bear that's in somebody's backyard without any conflict. Kind of implies or infers that there's some kind of physical attack or something like that. No, and that's not the case. These are situations where there may be a bear in somebody's backyard that has been feeding off of bird feeders or pet food or whatever else that they're being provided intentionally or unintentionally, and they become habituated. And that's a conflict. People would rather not have a bear hanging around their backyard, perhaps. So I want to clarify that one thing. So we see here the numbers that since we've been recording this thing, it's these number of incidences or encounters have increased, and the rapid increase, the tremendous increase in 2020, 3,507. I'm not sure what the factors are in that. It might be that just people are aware that our bears are around and they're being reported more. I hesitate to say that this suggests that there's a dramatic increase in problem bears. I would suggest that there's just more reporting of incidences, where in the past you say, well, there's a bear, what the heck, let him hang out, no big deal. Whereas now people are starting to report, and the DEP is encouraging that as well. They do want to know where there might be potential incidences. So that number, I'm kind of skeptical as far as that dramatic increase being such a huge leap from the previous years. But anyway, it's people are concerned. Bears are fairly large, as they indicated. You know, male bear can be 450 pounds, and a 250-pound female bear is a good size. These are the sightings as of 2020. Bolton, there's 3 indicated. Now that means those are the ones that were reported. There may be more than that, and also that 3 does not necessarily mean 3 separate bears either. Because of the home range, that may be 1 bear sighted 3 times by 3 different individuals. So these numbers are just strictly sightings. It doesn't really have it doesn't really correlate with the actual population. I know Kurt and Deb, I think you live out in Winchester. That's one of the highest. You got 222 sightings out there. Torrington, 448. Simsbury, I think Simsbury has held the record for a while, 725 sightings. And once you get in the northern part of the state, once you get west of the Connecticut River, it's not unusual, depending on the time of day, depending on the season, it's not unusual to see a bear walking down the town green on the side of the road. Pretty common. I remember when we were doing a deer study, we were driving out to Salisbury and Canaan every day, and we'd pass through Farmington. And I remember one time we're driving out 44, and right there in somebody's yard, there were a family of 4 bears just hanging out, relaxing right in the yard. So that's relatively common. It's not unusual to see bears in that part of the state. If you look at the way the numbers are distributed, that's where we see them in the northwest corner. we start to get to the eastern part of the state, you know, like Lebanon is 2, Franklin is 1, Voluntown is 3, and so forth. They're being cited as of in 2020. There's no reported sighting in Stonington. That doesn't mean there wasn't a bear that passed through at some point in time down there. But this map indicates that they're pretty much everywhere in the state. Just like bobcats now, we know that bobcats are in every town in Connecticut, and same thing with black bears. The density is much lower on the eastern side, but that's changing each year.
And Ray, we had 2 comments. So one from Kim saying that summer of 2020, hold on, there's feedback.
What was that?
Sorry about that, Ray. So in the summer of 2020, because of COVID, there were more people outside who normally weren't. So maybe that's why the numbers are up.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'm sure that's the reason. Yes, thank you. Yeah. How could I forget? How could I forget COVID? So it doesn't make any difference. I'm retired, so it doesn't make any difference to me. I'm out in the woods anyway. So.
Are you able to get on?
All right. We'll talk a little bit about population sizes. There's two terms. There's 2 terms that are used when we're talking about populations of wildlife. We have carrying capacity, which is actually probably better called biological carrying capacity. And as it says here, the maximum equilibrium number of organisms of a particular species that can be supported indefinitely in a given environment. Another way of putting that is the sustainable population in any particular habitat. If we're talking, we usually talk about density of wildlife species, as far as population densities of wildlife species, in terms of X number per square mile or per square kilometer. The biological carrying capacity, that depends on how healthy the environment is, how healthy the habitat is. So if we have a biological carrying capacity of say deer in Connecticut, in a healthy habitat, we could probably have a sustainable population of maybe 15 to 20 deer per square mile, and they could be supported pretty much indefinitely as long as that habitat isn't degraded. Sure. The more recent, and especially in more densely human populated states, the more recent term now is cultural carrying capacity. Now, that's a very different concept. That's the maximum number of individuals of a species that the human population will tolerate. And that can vary from town to town, and that will certainly vary from individual to individual. So that's a hard number to put a cap on. Some people will say that 1 bear is too many, and some people will say, well, I could tolerate, 2 or 3 bears in our town, sightings, as long as it wasn't a problem. That can be all over the place. So as far as management, as far as the DEP determining with species that are hunted, legally hunted, bears are not at this point. They are not legally hunted. As far as determining the harvest for species that can legally be hunted, this cultural carrying capacity kind of varies from town to town, from area to area. So that really has to be determined by some way of tallying a vote to see what the average individual would prefer as far as numbers.
And Ray, we have a question from Polly. Did you estimate about 1,000 bears currently in Connecticut?
About the what? What?
Did you estimate that there are about 1,000 bears currently in Connecticut?
Yeah, more. As of last year, I think the estimate has kind of gone up to about 1,500. Again, this can only be just kind of a ballpark estimate, because you have to take a look at the number of sightings and then factor in, well, how many of these are repeat sightings, and based on research where there's been more observation of individual bears in research projects, you can kind of extrapolate. But it's just a wild guess at this point. We don't know, and there's really no way of telling the actual. I mean, we couldn't do an actual physical census for all the bears. But yeah, 1,000 in Connecticut anyway, and maybe 1,500 more recently. The bear population is increasing, and we can talk about that, I think, a little bit further. Here's some of the habitats that they prefer. This looks like most anywhere in Connecticut. They like the forested areas. They like to have maybe a mix of deciduous and coniferous trees. They like to have an understory of brush. They do like to have swamps and have stream areas. Swamps are great places to hide out. There is some food available in swamps, but they're excellent places to hide out. Bobcats as well. Bobcats and bears seem to prefer a lot of the same kind of
What are you getting
habitat.
there?
And they like to have the typical Connecticut, and Bolton. A lot of places in Bolton are very much like this. You know, in your backyard, you'll see this. This is ideal habitat. They like rock ledges as well. Same thing with bobcats. Bobcats like to have rock ledges as well. Bobcats often will use. They may use rock crevices for denning sites and so forth. Not so much with bears, however, but this kind of thick understory and overstory helps provide a lot of the foods that bears prefer.
Ray, we have a question from Brian. Are any bears tagged and tracked?
They're not locally. Most of those are on the at least as far as I know, not to date. That will probably change over time when we start getting a more of an increase in the population. We'll probably see more that are tagged and collared for tracking. So here we are is suitable habitat for black bears. The darkest green is the best habitat, and then the green, the medium green is good habitat, and then we start getting down and what tan is fair, and then poor habitat is the red. That's pretty much the Connecticut River Valley. That's the coastline. That's very urban. All of that, pretty much all of that red area is very urban, all the way up to Connecticut River Valley. So that doesn't really provide that much habitat that's really suitable for black bears, coyotes maybe, or other wildlife, but not so much for black bears. So we look at where's Bolton there? Yeah, Bolton is good habitat according to this map. And the surrounding areas in Glastonbury and Andover and Coventry are the best habitat. So we're surrounded by excellent habitat for black bears. And we know from sightings that we've had this past year, there's been several sightings of a bear, and I'm saying a bear because it probably just one single bear that's being cited on numerous occasions, and it sounds like, because of the habit, sounds like it might be a dispersing young male that's passing through. Manchester, it has been cited in Bolton a couple times. There also in Glastonbury, there's been a female bear with several cubs. I think she has 3 cubs that had been sighted in the general Glastonbury area on numerous occasions. So that means we have a resident and breeding population in the area. So we may, at this point in time, most of the bears are denned up, and so we're probably not going to see a whole lot of activity for a while, probably till March. But as you can see from this chart, we live in really excellent areas for bear habitat. And one thing that's important to understand with bears is that they're omnivores. They are not carnivores in the sense of what we call obligate carnivores. Like a bobcat is an obligate carnivore, which means that that's pretty much all they eat is meat, is different prey animals. Black bears are like us, omnivores, and a good portion of their diet is not animal protein. A good portion of it is actually vegetable, fruits, and nuts and so forth. They do eat insects. Unfortunately, beekeepers know that. They will opportunistically capture a fawn, but that's generally within the first week of the fawn's life, because they're pretty helpless when they're that young. When fawns are a week old, they can't run that well, and bear could probably run them down, but a lot of times the fawn's going to freeze, and makes it easy for the bear to capture. I participated with the DEP on a 4-year fawn mortality study in the northwest part of the state, and of the predation on fawns, we had half of the fawns, half the kills were bears and half were bobcats. So they do take fawns, not huge numbers, but they do take that. Woodchucks, they will certainly eat woodchucks. But this is their number one food. Now here in Bolton, we've had a pretty good mass crop. We've had a pretty good crop of acorns this year. So that means that the bears had an ample supply of food to get ready for winter. And late summer and fall, this is what they'll be eating. Make sure I'm on the same page here. They'll be eating this. They will eat grasses, the fruits and nuts, all kinds of berries that come ripe throughout the summer and fall. As the previous image showed, insects, bees, wasps, and so forth, grubs. They will open up logs to extract grubs from dead trees. Sometimes you'll see that. You see that again more because of the higher population in the northwest part of the state. You see that more often where bears just rip open a log, get at the grubs that are inside of that. And sometimes on standing trees, they will open up the, rip some of the loose bark off on dead trees and excavate for grubs and so forth. They will prey on, they can, on livestock. So that's something to bear in mind. Livestock, not so much horses or cattle, but things like goats, llamas, chickens, smaller animals that people have for livestock. There've been reports of people have been raising rabbits. They've eaten those. Cats and dogs really are not factored in. They really don't bother cats and dogs. It's mostly livestock, the smaller livestock that may be of concern. Let's see what we got here. Beech nuts, that's another thing. Around locally, I haven't seen a whole lot of beech nuts, and I'm not sure what the reason for that is. But that's a favored summer and fall food. That's another what is known as a mast crop. That's a hard mast, like nuts, so forth, as opposed to soft mast, like fruit, berries, and so forth. Beech nuts, black cherry. The fruit on the black cherries. It's funny that I've seen, where was I forgot where it was a large black cherry tree, very much like this one here shown, and the top branches were all bent inward, broken inward, and it almost looked like a nest, but we knew from experience what was going on. The bear climbed to the top of the tree and grab a branch full of berries, bring that over, snap it, and eat the berries. Bend another one over and snap it and eat the berries. So the entire top of the tree was snapped. All the branches were snapped over, so they could access the black cherries. And that's a pretty popular soft mast crop that they like. Maple leaf viburnum. That's another very common plant that we'll see. The berries are late summer and fall, so they eat that. What else do we have here? I want to make sure I don't. This is another reason right here. This is another reason why swamps are popular places for bears. Is, believe it or not, this is one of their favorite foods. It's one of the first green things that comes up, and this is all skunk cabbage. And that, I'm sure, is an acquired taste, but I guess if you're hungry, you'll eat whatever is available. These are some of the first things that come up. I'm pretty sure that I think there's an alternative common name for skunk cabbage. I think they call it bear root as well. But anyway, this is one of the first plants that pop up in the spring, and this comes up about the time that they're coming out of hibernation. Not much else is up, and so this is what they'll eat in large amounts. So again, another reason why the swamps are a popular location. We'll talk about bird feeders and some of the problems with intentional or unintentional feeding later on when we talk about ways of avoiding conflicts. But I don't think I have anything that illustrates this. But anyway, there's a behavior that bears undergo in late summer, early fall. It's called hyperphagia, and what that means is their hunger goes into overdrive, and they require, and the estimates vary, but a reasonable number based on the research is they need 20,000 calories per day, and that's so they can put on enough fat to get themselves through the winter. During the winter, they don't eat. From right about now, from the end of November through March, they don't eat a thing. So they're relying on body fat to get them through. And to be able to do that, they have to eat like crazy. 20,000 calories a day. I don't know how many Hershey bars that is, but that's quite a few. Just so you know, a droll Yankee, a typical droll Yankee bird feeder holds about 16,000 calories concentrated in one package. So that's the big draw of bird feeders, is because they can get that 16,000 calories without having to exert any energy to obtain that. So that's a wonderful resource for them to be able to meet their caloric needs. If they can't put on enough weight, they may delay hibernation, and the sows may not give birth to the offspring. They need to have so many. They need to put on so much weight for them to be able to go into hibernation. If they're not able to do that, that really interferes with their physiological processes. So this time of year, November through March, is generally when the bears, they're not true hibernators. They go into more of a state of torpor. Their heart rate slows, their temperature is lowered a little bit, but not like woodchucks, groundhogs. Woodchucks are true hibernators, and they are out down for the count once they go into hibernation. Whereas a black bear can be aroused. The torpor, I try to, so we have something compared to. It's like maybe taking too many Benadryl. You just want to sleep, but you can be aroused, and bears can be aroused, and they can run generally, unless they're cornered in a confined area, they're probably not going to attack, but they can be very active. And during that torpor, and I'll, for convenience sake, I'll just say hibernate. During that period, they don't eat, they don't drink, they don't urinate, and they don't defecate. And there's quite a few research projects trying to figure out how they manage to do this. I'm sure there's a lot of folks would say, boy, that'd be really convenient if I could just go to sleep in November and then wake up in March, and they don't lose the muscle tone. Their bones don't degrade like with humans. They, with when they're up on the space station without gravity, they lose muscle tone. It affects their regeneration of bones and so forth. That doesn't happen with bears being totally inactive, and they're so extremely well adapted to winter. There's not that much food. They're omnivores, and they require a lot of vegetable matter as well as animal matter too. But if it's not available, so their option is to pretty much sleep it off for the entire period and then start fresh in the spring. That's a pretty amazing adaptation for such a large animal.
Right, I have two comments for you.
Yeah.
From Katie. Katie did mention that she has seen tagged and collared bears in Connecticut. But then she also had a question, where do bears hibernate and what type of environment?
Yeah, we do have tagged and collared bears in Connecticut. Most of them, I think I mentioned, most of them are in the Western Connecticut, but yeah, we do have them. I'm not sure the total count at this point. And their hibernation, they can be We'll talk more about this as we're progressing here, but they will be in brush piles. They used to be, when we had them, they used to like hollow logs. Under brush piles, fallen trees. If you walk through the woods and you see some of these huge trees that have been uprooted and fallen over. There are wonderful cavities sometimes that are created underneath. And a bear doesn't really need that much room. It's surprising how small a den space that mom really requires. She's all curled up in there, and her little tiny cubs don't amount to too much. They really don't take up much space. They will typically modify it by dragging in leaves and grasses and so forth to make it a little bit more, a little bit drier and perhaps a little bit warmer. They will be, sometimes they'll den under people's decks, you know, if it's protected from the weather. I did, a couple years ago, I encountered a bear that had, she built basically in a swamp, she built a nest, which was made out of swamp grasses, probably about 3 foot high and maybe 10 foot in diameter, all exposed. It was a mild winter. I don't know if that was a factor, but it was a mild winter, and she had 4 cubs right out in the open, which was kind of interesting to see that. So that's also a possibility besides being a den per se. This is this covers some of the. I don't know if we have that many hollow trees down around that are big enough for bear dens around here, but if they're big enough, they can use them. Mountain laurel groves are common. Brush piles, again, fallen trees. I I made the mistake of trying to check out a potential den last week, and unfortunately it was in the swamp, so I sunk up to my knees in 20-degree weather and in the swamp, and so I had to kind of get back and get dried out. No bear, but it was a beautiful little potential den site underneath a fallen tree. And here's what I'm talking about. Here's a bear that denned under somebody's deck, and that's one of the biologists took that photograph. She's in hibernation, but and if you look, you can see all the leaves and so forth that are piled up that she's resting on. So they do modify it, and that open air nest that I mentioned, that was a really pretty amazing bit of construction for her to build that entire nest up. Oh, here we go. There's one. So the bears they have a very interesting reproductive system. Sorry, reproductive system. They have a physiological phenomenon known as delayed implantation. And they will, mating for the bears are generally the end of June, first part of July. And they have, technically all together, they have a roughly 220-day gestation period. However, with delayed implantation, when the egg is fertilized, it develops into a small feature known as a blastocyst. And that does not implant into the womb until about 10 weeks prior to giving birth. So the actual in-womb gestation is only about, well, that'd be about 70 days, more or less. So the actual in-womb gestation is very short. Very interesting. The only other animals that I know of that delayed implanters as far as their reproductive processes are weasels, mink, fisher, otters, so forth. They also do have the same process, that they have the actual in-womb gestation is quite short. And so when the bears are born, when the cubs are born, they're pretty tiny. They're only about 6 to 12 ounces. And their eyes are closed. They have no teeth. They're very, very thin hair on their bodies. And so if they're born generally in January and February. And mom may have anywhere between 1 to 4 to maybe 5 cubs in the den. She's still in somewhat of a torpor. The cubs nurse while she's still kind of half in and out, and they have some kind of a extended gestation period inside the den. And they're really not exposed to anything. It's similar to like possums that are born very, very prematurely and work their way up into the pouch and attach themselves to the nipple. And for the rest of their development, that's really outside of the womb. Kind of a similar thing going on with bear cubs. So from February through the next month or so, March, they're still protected. It's just them and their mom, and that's it. And they're just nursing all the time. Yeah, see what we got for trying to coordinate my notes with the this is a pretty young one here. Like I say, when they're born at 6 to 12 ounces, they're like the size of a small squirrel or a chipmunk when they're born. And that's pretty amazing considering that they develop into maybe a male at 450 pounds, pretty tiny. So they're very vulnerable, but being in the den really helps protect them while they're still developing. And mom is an excellent protector, a defender of her little ones as well. All heard the stories about not getting between a mother bear and her cubs, but she will defend her cubs mostly once they're out of the den. Most of the time, she's going to scoot them up a tree. That's generally what their strategy is as far as avoiding any conflict with people, mostly, I think. They're weaned at about roughly about 7 months. So they're very dependent on mom for that period of time, for the entire summer and pretty much the entire fall. And they will stay with their mom through that next winter into the next year till they're a year old. Female bears generally only have cubs every other year. In between years when she's still raising that previous year's cubs. So they breed and have cubs generally every other year. And it's dependent on food supply. If they don't have an adequate food supply, that may be prolonged. They may be as many as 3 or 4 years between having a litter of cubs, all depending on the food supply. But with a good food supply every other year, and their cubs will stay with her when she dens up again the next winter, and usually that next year, by the time they're 1.5 years, male cubs are usually scooted off, and mom doesn't tolerate the male cubs usually after about 18 months, 1.5 years. So that next fall, she will be having probably everything on schedule. She will be having cubs again. That's the second year. She will be having cubs again, and she's going to scoot the other cubs off while she goes and has her own has her next crop of cubs. And the young males, once the young males are booted out, they're kind of they can disperse quite a distance. So if we see a fairly small bear all by themselves traveling through town, that's probably what that is. That's just a dispersing young male. Mom didn't want him around anymore, and off he goes. Bears have a depending on the whether male or female bears will generally have, in Connecticut, have a smaller home range, anywhere between 6 to maybe 19 or 20 square miles will be her home range, and she stays pretty close to home, especially when she has cubs. Male bears going to be more than that, anywhere between maybe 12 as many as 60 square miles home range, so they can travel long distances and still be within their home range. The male bears, just to give you an idea of a relative size, Bolton is roughly 14.7, I think, 14.7 square miles. So that's kind of for a female bear, that would be pretty much the maximum size of her home range. Now they're not restricted by political boundaries. So that can be, we have a bear that maybe she had cubs in Andover, part of her home range, maybe Bolton, part of her home range, maybe in Glastonbury, Hebron. So just to give you a rough idea of the size, and then male bears, much larger home range. They're relatively territorial. Males and females maybe have territory that overlaps, but they really don't associate with each other except for breeding season. Males don't have anything to do with the rearing of the cubs. That's strictly on mom. How are we doing on time here? 6:30.
Okay, so we're at about 7:30, Ray.
Okay.
Yes, we have about 15 more minutes or so.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. I'm going to kind of move along here. As it says here, black bear populations are increasing in Connecticut. And this is actually interesting. This is an area where there's very large houses and surrounded by woods. There's a new term called the exurbs, and actually bears really like that because it's a lot of food resources, and that's in backyards and plenty of places to hide. And so these are different things. Here's a commercial beehive, and that's the kind. They're after the insects and the honey too, but the insects and the larvae are particularly important for them. And when they're trapped and tagged, they have ear tags put in both ears, and if they have a collar, then that'll be put on at that time. The color of the ear tags really depends on the year. A a red does not mean a problem bear. There's no distinction as far as the tagging. That's more or less a random. As far as the bears that are tagged, the numbers and the letters on there will indicate what year that bear was tagged, and which one of the bears in the series of that year that was tagged, and the color is the particular year. A lot of times it's not unusual for a bear to lose a tag and only have one tag left in their ear, so that may be cited as well. And when they are trapped, go through a whole process of weighing. And we'll come here, take measurements. You check their teeth. Sometimes the tooth is extracted, and a tooth that can be sent to the lab, and a cross section of that tooth will reveal how old that bear is, because the what they call the cementum annuli in the tooth is very much like the rings on a tree and can be counted and can give you a pretty precise age of that bear. Bears we generally not relocated, and they cannot be relocated out of state. That's not legal, and usually relocation doesn't necessarily work too well. Often they come back to where they were captured. Once they have the collars on, this is how they're kept track of. There's a culvert trap that's used for trapping with a kind of a guillotine type door that closes once they trip the trigger inside. That's usually baited with jelly donuts. And we get into problem bears. Here's a situation. This is what I want to spend the last few minutes about. About ways of avoiding conflicts. So these are things that are very important, because the main, with pretty much all wildlife, the number one cause of conflicts with wildlife are due to human feeding. Sometimes that's intentional and sometimes it's unintentional, but it doesn't make the animal doesn't care whether it's intentional or not. Once they get used to a regular steady food supply, they will become habituated to that particular area. And if there's no adverse conditions associated with that, they'll keep on coming. So bird feeders are a number one source of food for them. It's recommended that you remove the bird feeders from late March through November. That's when they're active. Once the end of November comes around, and they go into their dens, and they'll come out in March. Garbage cans should be inside a garage or a shed. They are developing garbage cans that are tested to be bear proof. I'm not sure how readily available they are in Connecticut. They're very common out west. A cap full of ammonia in the trash is helpful too. And this is rather important too, is clean and store grills in a garage or shed after use. If the bears have a remarkable sense of smell, and if they smell, and I'm not sure, there's been various estimates as far as how far away they can smell an uncleaned grill, but it's quite a distance. Let's put it that way. I've heard estimates from 1 mile to 5 miles. Under 5 miles is kind of, it may be possible, it may be accurate, but certainly at a long distance, they can smell a barbecue grill that hasn't been cleaned. So that's something to bear in mind. And now these are things that you should not do. Obviously don't intentionally feed bears. And actually that applies to any wildlife. Wildlife should not be fed. That's usually the phrase that's used with bears is a fed bear is a dead bear. And that ultimately often is the case for one reason or another. Do not approach. Some of this should be common sense, but it's surprising how many people you see on Facebook and YouTube and so forth that do these questionable activities here. Do not approach or get close to the bear for a photo or video. Don't leave pet food outside. And don't add meats or sweets to a compost pile. That's a big attractant for not just bears, but raccoons and skunks and a variety of other animals as well are attracted to things like that. And camping is the same kind of situation, but sometimes you have to go through a couple extra steps with that. You want to cook or store food near your tent, and don't climb a tree or run when you see a bear. Black bears are excellent tree climbers, so it doesn't make any difference if you climb a tree and he really wants to come up after you. He will definitely come up after you. Make your presence known. Keep dogs on a leash. Walk away slowly if you surprise a bear. Usually, just for the sake of safety, you don't want to turn around and walk away. You certainly don't want to run. Walk away slowly, but backing slowly might be a better way of putting it, as long as you can do that safely without tripping over yourself. And do hang food from a tree at night. The rule of thumb is that the food should be hung 10 feet up and 6 feet away from the nearest tree, which means a horizontal line. And usually what you see is like a pulley system. So there's a horizontal line between two trees, and then a pulley affixed to the center of that. And then your food sack can be hauled up and be 10 feet above the ground and 6 feet away from the tree. It's important, making noise. Making noise. When I used to hike in the west in the Rockies, Canadian Rockies, and I used to have a little bell on my backpack, so every step I took, the bell would ring. Anything to warn the animals that you're there. Unfortunately, you may not see animals that you do want to see, but you also may not see the animals that you don't want to see anyway. It's kind of a reiteration of what was said before. Make more noise, wave your arms, throw objects at a bear. Black bears really attack humans. If you are attacked, do not play dead. Fight back with anything available. That's getting pretty extreme. I don't want to scare people, because the chance of getting attacked and injured by a bear, black bear, I clarify that, a black bear, are very slim. If they're in your yard, if you follow the guidelines, eliminate all sources of food that were mentioned. And there's another step is aversive conditioning. Conditioning is make a lot of noise. Sometimes people have taken a large tin coffee can, put quarters or rocks in it and make a loud rattle. People have used foghorns, air horns, anything to make a lot of noise to make it unpleasant for them to hang around. And same thing with coyotes and other animals that you don't necessarily want hanging around your backyard. Same thing. Make a lot of noise. Something that's objectionable. Beating on pots and pans. That's another possibility. And a step up from that. Sometimes the DEP will use paintball guns to discourage bears from hanging around in the area, but this is generally repeated over a period of time. It's a matter of conditioning them to get to the point where it's really very unpleasant for them to be in that particular backyard. So as far as bear sightings, this might be the better way here. If you go to this site, portal down the bottom here, portal.ct.gov/DEEP, you can report sightings. They are looking, state's looking for reports on sightings of black bears, bobcats, fishers, and moose, I think, are the species that they're interested in having reported. So that's the site to go to. How are we doing here?
Good. And Ray, just to let folks know, I'm putting some links in the chat.
Yeah.
So I have one that's for bear sightings, and now I'm going to put the site for wildlife.
Just want to say thank you so much, Ray. Millie had to go to the other room, so she says good night and sleep well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for tuning in.
You're welcome. Thank you, Trish.
Oh, you're so welcome. Great to see you. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining. And Ray, thank you again. It's so wonderful to get this information about our local wildlife and, to hear about things we can or should do and shouldn't do. And, it's just wonderful to learn so much more about these animals. All right. So we'll just give everyone one last chance. If anyone wants to say anything, you are welcome to. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you from the northwest bear corner of the world.